This is a notice for all participants. This is a public meeting and proceedings are being webcast live online. A recording will also be available for playback on the Council's website shortly afterwards. Please note that your name will appear in the live stream and in the recording. Should you not wish for your image to appear on these, please turn your camera off. Third parties should not record or film the local plan hearing sessions, and neither the Council nor the Planning Inspectorate are liable for any third party recordings. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. It's 2 o'clock, so time to resume the hearing sessions of part of the examination of the Tunbridge Wells local plan. Hopefully everyone can see and hear me okay. And just check the microphone with the programme officer. Welcome along for those of you who haven't attended any of the previous sessions. My name is Matthew Birkinshaw, Chartered Town Planner and the Inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to hold the examination. The programme officer, Charlotte Glancy, is on the virtual meeting today, so I'll just ask Charlotte to turn her camera and microphone on. No doubt you'll have been in touch with Charlotte with regard to attending today's session. Charlotte is the programme officer for the examination, so if you do have any questions, queries about documents, meeting invites or dates for sessions, please do speak to Charlotte. And as I've done on previous sessions, I'll just ask Charlotte at this stage, is there anything from yourself, Charlotte, that we need to be aware of before we start today's session? Everyone managed to log in okay and access the meeting?
Yep, everybody's here.
Yeah, brilliant, good stuff. Thank you very much. I know there's some new faces around the virtual table today, so I'll very quickly go through some sort of housekeeping matters for both the examination in general and also the use of the sort of virtual element. So starting with the virtual element first then, so the sort of meeting this afternoon obviously will be held using Zoom. There's some guidance notes that have been issued already, but I will very quickly sort of go through just in case anybody hasn't used this format before. So what will happen is the hearing this afternoon is a structured discussion. It's led by myself. There's no formal agenda, but what we will do when we're looking at these sites is we'll go through the matters, issues and questions documents. So they're the questions that I posed to the council and that people have made their hearing submissions upon. So we'll go through those questions. What I would say is I'll lead the discussion, ask questions of the council and ask participants to make points as they see fit. So if you do wish to make a point, if you use the raise hand function within Zoom, so I've got mine at the bottom of the screen where it says reactions, and I've got a raise hand function as per, it should be on your screen now. And again, if I want to lower my hand, I can lower it like that. So what I'll say is when we get going, if I can ask people to turn cameras and microphones off, with the exception of myself and the council, and then when you wish to speak, if you use the raise hand function within Zoom, that alerts me to the fact that you'd like to participate and I can bring you in at that moment. So at that stage then, when I turn to you, if you can turn your camera and microphone on, and if it's the first time you've spoken, if you could just let me know who you are, if you're acting on behalf of a particular landowner, client, or residents group, that'd be much appreciated. And as I've said for other hearing sessions, the hearing sessions are an opportunity to allow participants to put their points across. So a couple of sort of factors to bear in mind there. So the first is I'm more than happy for people to participate in the discussion, and I very much encourage that, and that's what today is all about. But that's on the basis that people participate in line with their Regulation 19 representations. So it's not an opportunity to engage on any sites that you haven't made representations on, or any topics that you've not made representations on. So really a bit of a health warning that I've said at the start of every session. More than happy for people to participate, but please do stick to the points you've made in your original representations, and the hearings aren't an opportunity to introduce any new written evidence or any new oral evidence that people haven't seen or heard before. And as I would say as well, we'll go through the matters, issues and questions document, but this is an opportunity for obviously you as participants to put your points forward. So if we get to the end of the session or the end of a particular site, and you think, well, I've got some points that the inspector hasn't asked any questions about and I'd like to talk about them, then please do raise them. So it's an opportunity to put your points across that are in your representations. And just on that point, I have seen all the representations made in response to the plan, and I've seen all the written submissions made in response to the matters, issues and questions. So as we go through some of the issues and start to unpick them, please bear in mind that I have read those, and we don't need to hear sort of statements read out or repeated or anything like that. So that was a very quick sort of run through as to the sort of rules of using Zoom. As I say, we've been using this for about a week and a half now. Touch wood, it seems to be going well. We might have a couple of issues here and there. If your internet drops out or you're having problems seeing people or hearing people, please let Charlotte know sort of outside of the hearing, and we can either break and stop and allow people to sort of restart and reboot internet and laptops, etc. And we should have enough time this afternoon to get through the slides on the agenda. So that's a very quick run through. I'll turn to the council now. Anything from the council before we get going? Any housekeeping matters to be aware of?
Sorry, sir. No, nothing from us at this point. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, so what I'll do is a note that several people in attendance today, but there's also several people who wish to talk about the Benenden sites. Is that how you pronounce the settlement, Benenden settlements, and in particular the neighbourhood plan? So we'll take those sites first, and we'll probably have a break, and then we'll come back and look at the other sites. So we'll go in reverse order. But I think the majority of people here probably are here today to discuss that. So hence the reason we'll do that. But there's certainly enough time to get through the remainder of the sites. So turning to the matters, issues and questions, really, the first question I asked was really sort of factual and procedural about the status of the neighbourhood plan. I think by way of introduction, if I could turn to the council and just ask then, so we know that the neighbourhood plan has been formally made, forms part of the development plan. So in terms of its relationship with the local plan, and obviously we'll come on to look at some of these sites and look at the soundness of the local plan, but can I just take the council's views then on what the adoption of the neighbourhood plan or the making of the neighbourhood plan means for the local plan, and what changes, if any, the council considers should be required to the local plan following its adoption.
Thank you, sir. If I can just very briefly, in terms of the chronology, set out that the consultation on the council's pre-submission local plan occurred spring last year. It had concluded just ahead of the examination of the Benenden neighbourhood plan. So the comments made by the examiner for the Benenden neighbourhood plan in relation to the Tunbridge Wells plan were in relation to the pre-submission local plan. And I mention that just in case we need to come back to that in due course. So as you said, sir, the Benenden neighbourhood development plan was made at full council, Tunbridge Wells Borough Council full council meeting on the 23rd of February 2022. That followed firstly the conclusions of the examiner, who Mr. Slater, who, subject to certain modifications proposed in his reports, felt that the neighbourhood plan met the basic conditions set out in legislation and met the legal requirements and could proceed to local referendum. And then secondly, and this is set out on page 4, the results of that local referendum held on the 3rd of February 2022, which was essentially a positive one, endorsing the use of the neighbourhood plan, development plan to decide planning applications in the parish of Benenden. So then, sir, turning to essentially your question 2, in terms of how the council considers that for reasons of soundness, it's necessary to delete the allocations set out in the submission local plan, and indeed the pre-submission local plan. So because the neighbourhood development plan had, or has, I should say, allocations within it, it now forms part of the development plan. The allocations within the made neighbourhood development plan, some of the comments that were made by the examiner reflected he felt that adjustments were needed to the policies in the neighbourhood development plan. Some of those reflected changes to take account of, to reflect matters in the pre-submission local plan that he felt where there was perhaps better wording, or there was elements that were stronger in the local plan. He set out that he felt it was necessary for the neighbourhood plan to be altered to reflect those. What it means now, sir, is that because those allocations are already part of the adopted development plan, that to have a further set of allocations in the local plan would be duplicating those policies that apply to a particular area. And paragraph 16 of the MPPF sets out that plans should avoid unnecessary duplication of policies that apply to a particular area. There are, whilst the council considers that the policies in the neighbourhood plan are broadly the same as those in the NDP, there are some differences between them, and that's explained, sir, in terms of in response to question 3 of the council's hearing statement, and with further information provided in the appendix to the hearing statement, which sets out almost element by element of each policy. It compares the different, or compares the relevant parts of the policies in the NDP with the policies in the submission local plan. And therefore, sir, in order to avoid that duplication, and in order to ensure that there are not policies which are, in order to avoid duplication, the council feels it's necessary to delete the policies from the submission local plan. It will be necessary then to adjust the strategic policy for Benenden Parish to make clear reference to the fact that the allocations are in the neighbourhood development plan, and to refer to the for example, the housing numbers that are derived from that. So if the policies were to be maintained in the local plan rather than the NDP, it would be necessary, in the council's view, for them to be adjusted so that they reflect exactly the policies in the made neighbourhood development plan. Otherwise, whilst they would be broadly in conformity, they would be duplicating, but additionally, there would be some discrepancies between the two of them. And therefore, for those reasons, the council feels it's necessary that the policies are deleted. I should also say that the council has been very clear that in the event that the Benenden neighbourhood development plan is made before the local plan is adopted, that the intention was that these policies be deleted. The reason why the council continued with allocations in the local plan was in the event that the neighbourhood development plan wasn't made for one reason or another, either that it failed the referendum, or indeed in the highly unusual circumstance that the council did not make the plan following a positive referendum. If that had have been the case and there were no policies in the local plan, there would have been a void essentially in terms of allocations for the parish of Benenden.
And in terms of the allocations that we find within the local plan, then just talk me through again a bit of the sort of background chronology to this as to how those sites came to be allocated in the local plan. So why are the sites allocated in the local plan the same then as the ones in the neighbourhood plan? So sort of which came first, and was it, you know, has there been any conflicts here? Has the council always been sort of aligned with, no, these are an appropriate strategy for the parish of Benenden, or has there been a conflict with, well, actually, no, as a local planning authority, you want to go down a slightly different route to the local community? So just talk to me a bit about the background to it all. So
the process was that the council undertook its SA and Sheila assessments of the sites, and happy to talk about. Of course, happy to talk about the results of those, which fed into the strategy and the allocations in firstly the draft local plan and then the pre-submission local plan. Separately, the parish council and their neighbourhood development plan group undertook its own process for assessment of sites. The borough council provided some training and guidance in terms of how it felt it was appropriate to undertake that assessment. But of course, the parish council had their own access to networks, access to their own advisors to undertake their site assessment process. So they ran in parallel. The council did work closely with the parish council. There was a lot of liaison, as I should say there has been for all of the parish councils and indeed town councils that are preparing their neighbourhood plans. We have a dedicated an officer whose work is essentially to work with the neighbourhood development plan groups and parish and town councils. So there was close liaison, but the site assessments were undertaken parallel, separately, but ultimately the conclusions that emerged or were emerging were similar. And through that liaison, the council or the borough council discussed with the parish council any differences. There were, and I've related to or referred earlier to the fact that there are, whilst they're broadly all four or all of the allocations, I should say, are broadly similar. There are some differences, and ultimately those differences reflect the different approaches and slightly different views that the council had at the time, or the councils had. I think the key things there is that the examiner, in looking at the neighbourhood development plan, he held a day-long examination. Again, relatively unusual for examination of a neighbourhood plan to actually have a hearing, but it did. It had a day-long session. The council attended, the parish council attended, others who are around the table were represented as well. Kent County Council Highways also attended. And so I think it's through that examination and the inspector's subsequent reports that the council, the borough council, is happy with the ultimately with the neighbourhood development plan. Where there were differences, the examiner picked that up, and set out his view. The parish council adopted those, made those changes, and ultimately the borough council, by its decision in February of this year to make the plan, agrees that it's happy with those changes.
And in terms of the overall scale of development that's proposed in Benenden, then talked about this morning in the context of Cranbrook, but again, I think it's within policy BE1. I think you said there, build approximately 87 to 95 new dwellings. So just in terms of the numbers then, presumably the numbers 87 to 95, does that reflect the made neighbourhood plan?
Well, there's a slight slight change in that the made neighbourhood plan refers to, for one of the allocations, which is BE3, land at Benenden Hospital. Rather than there being a range of houses, the NDP sets out that there should be up to 25 units at that site. So accordingly, point 2 of PSTR/BE1 would need to be adjusted ever so slightly to reflect that. In terms of the council's approach to these allocations, you'll note, sir, that 2 of them are at the village of Benenden itself. There are 3 settlements in Benenden parish: Benenden village, Iden Green, which is to the south, and we discussed previously the removal of the limits to built development at Iden Green, and then the third is at East End. Now, East End is is away from the Benenden village itself. There is some distance between them. Importantly, the council's decision for allocations at Benenden at East End reflect the fact that it is a previously developed site. Benenden Hospital is a sizable site at East End. It's essentially split into different segments. The south-western section comprises the main hospital buildings. It has been subject to recent redevelopment to update and upgrade the hospital facilities. The northern side of the road comprises ancillary buildings and space, together with, on the northeastern parcel, some housing, relatively low low density, some of it in need of replacing. And then the southeastern corner comprises a series of buildings, either which have been unused for a substantial period of time, or are that whole section has been unused for a substantial period of time, and that quadrant has planning permission already for the provision of housing there, which is linked to the redevelopment of Benenden Hospital itself. Importantly, sir, this part of the parish, and indeed this part of the borough, is outside of the area of outstanding natural beauty. So whilst the council recognises that the site it is not and does not have the same facilities as at Benenden village, importantly, it is outside of the AONB and is previously developed land, and that was factored into its assessment of the sites in terms of its suitability for residential development.
And that was set out in the Sheila, I believe, in the site assessment papers. It talks about its location, and we've talked before about the there's the judgments that councils have to make in choosing some of these sites. So in terms of Benenden itself, obviously, yeah, you've accepted there that obviously you've got these sites that are beyond the village, but the site-specific reasons why you consider that that it's appropriate, reuse of brownfield land, etc., etc. In terms of the scale of development that then's proposed in Benenden itself, the village, again, is that appropriate? Do you think that sort of again aligns with the settlement role and function studies that you've looked at? Is it commensurate with the size, scale, level of facilities that are on offer in the village there?
In short, sir, yes, it does, and there's been detailed assessment of the individual sites. Both of which are the allocations are both non-major in the AONB. So in broad terms, yes, we feel that the scale of growth at Benenden is appropriate having regard to its role and function. But secondly, picking up again on what we were saying this morning, they are appropriate sites having regard to their overall assessment in terms of their suitability, particularly conscious of the AONB location. Other sites around Benenden were put forward in the call for sites, but through the council's Sheila and SA assessment were considered not suitable for allocation. And interestingly, the parish council came to the same conclusions through its assessments.
And just in terms of the hospital sites then, recognising its location and undisputed really, you talked about the benefits that arise from reuse of previous developed land. So just in terms of its location, I think within the policy requirements, there's some requirements that relate to travel and transport. So it's worthwhile just looking at those and understanding then what's proposed as part of these developments to, in terms of promoting sustainable patterns of development, minimising the reliance on the private car, etc., etc. So what's proposed as part of these developments that might assist in that regard?
So firstly, sir, I would point to criterion or requirement 5. So starting with BE3, which is the provision of small publicly accessible retail outlet, and requirements around the length of time that it should be operational for. Benenden Hospital is there are outpatient, or there are patients staying there overnight. There are obviously a number of people work there. There are visitors to the hospital, so the scope for a retail outlet within the buildings can be accommodated. And again, this was discussed at the examination. Additionally, sir, the requirement 6, minibus provision to link from the site to Benenden and indeed Tenterden, and again reflective of both, or to be used by both the residents, but also those who are either employed at the hospital or indeed visiting, and the provision of an active travel link as well at point 2. So it was those through those points that recognised that there will be a need for a number of trips to be made by the private car, but to seek to ensure that some trips can be by foot, i.e. to the shop, or by other forms of transports, so the minibus and indeed cycling.
So if we put to one side the neighbourhood plan for now, to put that to one side, sort of pretend that doesn't exist. Is it the case then in the council's position that if you're in a sort of no neighbourhood plan scenario, none of this had happened, that actually these sites would be within this local plan and put forward and justified and found their way into the plan in the same way that any other sites have?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So and weighing heavily in that decision is the fact that it's previously developed land, and secondly, and we've mentioned it before in terms of the distribution of development topic paper, seeking to ensure that opportunities for residential developments outside of the area of outstanding natural beauty can be taken where there are appropriate sites. So yes, if there wasn't a neighbourhood development plan, and as I said before, the council's assessment and its process, it actually ran slightly ahead of the neighbourhood development plan own process in terms of the chronology. So yes, if there wasn't an NDP here, the council would have continued or would have allocated or proposed the allocation of those. They didn't come in, for example, as a result of the NDP. They were arrived at independently.
Okay, thank you. I'll open it up now to comments, observations, representations that people wish to make then at this stage. There's some participants here that may want to come in at this stage. Yeah, we'll go to Merrick Lewis, please.
Thank you very much, sir. Sorry, I'm being told that my video has been stopped, but I can see myself on screen. Can you see and hear me okay, sir? And someone's kindly taken my hand down. I'm not sure, I wasn't seen to be applauding what Mr. Bourne said there, or whether I was actually putting my hand up, but at all events, I can be seen and I can be heard.
Good to go.
Thank you very much, sir. If I start off what I was going to say by going back to your initial question, sir, which is why, for soundness reasons, the hospital allocations need to be deleted. And my first answer to that, sir, is that you haven't had an answer from the council. They are still saying that the reason these sites are going to be dropped from scrutiny in this plan is because there would be unnecessary duplication between the policies in the local plan and the policies in the neighbourhood plan. That's tacking on to or tagging on to one phrase in paragraph 16 of the NPPF. And in my respectful submission, sir, that's no justification at all, simply for dropping the allocations from the plan. In the same breath, sir, as characterizing this as some kind of justification for dropping the sites from the local plan, Mr. Bourne said twice that there are such similarities between the allocations in the neighbourhood plan and what appears in the local plan, that again, there's duplication, so let's drop them from the local plan. But every time he said that, he said that there were similarities, and you'll recall the word he used, sir, he kept saying there were discrepancies. So again, sir, to pose the question for you, which I would submit is an important question, if there are differences between what's been looked at in the neighbourhood plan and what's being looked at in the local plan, then self-evidently, sir, those differences have to be resolved as part of this process. It's not good enough, in my respectful submission, just to drop them from that process. And that, my proposition, sir, can be tested in this way, because of course, well, Mr. Bourne didn't help you with that, but everybody knows that what was SSP3 in the neighbourhood plan, that's to say, that's the southern part of the hospital site allocation, it's ALBE3 in the draft local plan, that's almost twice the size in the neighbourhood plan. And so, sir, if ALBE3 and ALBE4 were simply dropped from the plan process, you would have more than a discrepancy, you would have a fundamental inconsistency between what was put forward by the Borough Council and what was put forward in their wisdom by the Parish Council in relation to the southern part of the site, sir. And I don't have a plan immediately to hand to show you, unless we look at the local plan itself, and I show you the area I've got in mind, sir. But it's the substantial area, almost the size of the developable area shown in the local plan, which appears in the neighbourhood plan, but not in the local plan. And it's suggested to you, sir, that simply that should be dropped. Forgive me 2 seconds, sir, and I'll give you the page number. It's somewhere in the 200s, I think, in the local plan. Sorry, so I've lit on it in the schla as well, looking for it, nearly there. Yes, so it's on page 226 of the local plan.
Yeah, and this was a point that was picked up by the council in their sort of summary document, which is an appendix to their hearing statement, where they go through the various differences. So this, well, I think it was under this is policy BE3, and they said there that the red line in the submission local plan does not include the area of open space in the southern part of the site, which is included in the red line within the neighbourhood plan.
That's the point, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, so you've referred to the appendix to, it's their response document, it's TWLP 043, and they go through all of the criteria in the neighbourhood plan, basically saying same but different, exactly the same as Mr. Bourne told us a minute or two ago. They recognise these discrepancies and differences between how it's dealt with in the neighbourhood plan, but then they're saying to you that in effect, it can be dropped from the local plan altogether and left up to the neighbourhood plan process. But it's something which the Friends of East End have covered in their submissions going way back when, that the level of scrutiny for this sort of thing in a neighbourhood plan examination is completely different from the level of scrutiny, if I may say so, sir, which you are submitting this, which you are submitting these allocations to, and why you pose the question, which the council still haven't answered, about why it's necessary for soundness reasons to drop the allocations from the plan. Now, that said, sir, Friends of East End say that the allocations ought to be cancelled altogether. What they say is that on grounds of sustainability, in inverted commas, because it's on grounds of their very unsustainability, draft allocations ALBE3 and ALBE4 should, as I put it a second or two ago, be cancelled from the plan, because they're not appropriate. And even though I've been talking for a while now, sir, that's my first shot on that question. By your leave, I will address you at greater length on the issue of sustainability, and also, sir, on the various factors which you talked through with Mr. Bourne about the features which are said to commend allocation of the sites. And sorry, I noticed Ms. Strouts has got her hand up, sir. I'm concerned to get in all I have to say so far. So can I ask her to hold fire for a moment while I pursue the point I want to make on behalf of the Friends of East End, sir. So I'm sorry, that's a very long opening shot from me, but that's my opening shot.
Just in terms of the boundary issue, then.
Yeah.
So let's just turn up the policies map. I'm looking at the policies map inset map for Benenden Hospital, which shows the two allocation BE4 and BE3. It's not got a key on it. I presume the key is on a different inset, but on the policies map, you've got the BE3 allocation, and then I'm assuming the area below is the AUMB.
So to assist you, sir, on that policy map, the red hatch, as you say, which goes below and to the west, is the area of outstanding natural beauty. The grey to the north is the borough boundary. The mustard colour is the area of development, and the hatch, the black sort of grid hatch, is the extent of the local wildlife site.
Okay, so when you say that the neighbourhood development plan allocation boundary is larger,
yeah,
does it include the black hatched area? Then is that what we're talking?
Yes, sir. I'm afraid you've got the advantage of me, because while I've got the policy plan open in the hard copy version of the plan, the policies map, I'd be grateful if I could be helped with for calling that up. What's the quickest way to find that on the council's website, please?
It's CD 3.129H bracket 2.
So I'll go into core documents. Thank you.
And just yes, to answer your question, sir, the neighbourhood plan allocation extended to the full extent of the local wildlife site, yeah, in that southeast quadrant of BE3.
Two questions then. First question is, why did the local plan not follow it? This goes back to other allocations we've talked about, haven't we, where you've got larger site allocations, but then you've got an area of residential development and within, and you said it's about managing open space. The first question is why does this one not do that? The second question is the plan, by not doing that, fundamentally unsound or fundamentally different by not including that area? Because it sounds like the neighbourhood plan included that area, but correct me if I'm wrong, said essentially there'd be no development within it. What the local plan is done is exclude it. So by definition says there'd be no development within it. So I'm struggling to see what the fundamental conflict is.
Just to assist you, sir, as well, the local wildlife site is already secured in terms of management through a legal agreement for the redevelopment of the hospital site, because all of this land ultimately is in the same ownership. That would need to be revisited as part of any new development, and the council's got no concerns about extending the allocation to include the local wildlife site. It's a similar approach is taken elsewhere, but I think possibly this was drawn this way to reflect the existing legal agreement to manage that land under a landscape and ecological management plan.
And just, I probably answered my own question,
yeah,
but that essentially the local plan,
in effect, the effect on the land, or particularly on the local wildlife site, is no different.
Yeah, and there's a requirement within the policy as well, I think.
Yeah.
Towards the long-term management of the local wildlife site located to the south and west of the site.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ms. Lewis. So just in terms of that point, then is it fundamentally different here? The local plan is showing an area for built development. Sounds like the neighbourhood plan does the same.
Well, so no, the point goes broader than that, sir. It goes back to what is the soundness reason for omitting the hospital sites from the local plan? Because again, you've been told the same as you've always been told before, that the sites are the same, but they're different. And if what happens is that the hospital site on the south side is dropped, what the world is left with, not just the council, but the parish as well, anyone who looks at the development plan, is they're left having to go to the neighbourhood plan to look what's envisaged, whereas that's actually the same, again, as I said, but different from what the council envisaged for it. It's in effect, sir, and I'll come to why this is very important in just a moment or two, but it's an abdication of the responsibility for strategic allocations of this sort, which is not appropriate through the neighbourhood plan. As you know, sir, in the NPPF, the guidance is that neighbourhood plans shouldn't undermine the strategic policies of local plans. And we have a local plan here, which, well, until you're being invited to drop the allocations from it, has these two allocations at the hospital, which are fundamentally unsustainable and therefore undermine the strategy of the local plan, and are demonstrably inconsistent with the strategy of the local plan, which is essentially to focus development within the limits or within limits of built development, and not have anything, sorry, where's the other one? Yeah, to provide for the growth of settlements, having regard to their role and function, constraints of opportunities, all of which directs development to the larger centres of population in accordance with a conventional hierarchy, rather than as here, and Mr. Bourne, you could see visibly struggling not to use the word remote where the hospital is concerned. He eventually said it's away. It's 2.5 miles away, sir, from Benenden, for which by historical accident, it forms part of the same parish as. It is not on any view a sustainable site for development. And I keep promising to come back why just on the broader issues that the mere locational features.
So let's put to one side this issue of whether or not it's deleted from the plan.
Yeah. I've
got the plan in front of me. That's the submitted plan. That's what the councils think is sound. They're the sites within it.
Yeah.
So let's work on that basis.
Yes.
Why then is the hospital site unjustified as an allocation? So put to one side the neighbour.
Sure.
Why is it unjustified as an allocation, bearing in mind what we've just heard, the council's sort of rationale previously about land, etc., etc. Why then is this allocation unjustified, and why should it be deleted from the local plan?
Yes, thank you very much, sir. I was going to come to that next anyway. So there's first key point on sustainability, just that it's a very long way away from the larger concentrations of population, which is what is shown in the council's defined centres hierarchy on page 451 of the plan, which goes, as one is familiar with, down from towns through villages to smaller sites. You get Benenden at the bottom of the hierarchy. But in fact, we're not talking about Benenden here. We're talking about Benenden Hospital, which is 2.5 miles away in East End, sir. East End doesn't even get a mention there. So it's fundamentally out of accordance with the hierarchy. On previously developed land, sir, of course, as you will know from the definition in the NPPF, and there's the same definition in the local plan, previously developed land or brownfield land is largely related to the footprints of buildings. So if one's looking on the north side of the hospital, one's got the tennis court and the car park, and one's got 18 dwellings there. The allocations, in my respectful submission, in their reliance on concept of previously developed land, are excessive, both in relation to the north of the site and in relation to the south side of the hospital site as well, sir. Again, dealing first of all with the north side of the road, there are 18 existing dwellings there. When you go and look at it, sir, if you haven't looked at it already, you will see that those dwellings are entirely sturdy. They've stood there for over 100 years. Okay, they might need to be redeveloped, but in my respectful submission, that's not a justification for having more development than might be assessed on the basis of PDL, which is not justified by the very remoteness of this, I don't call it settlement, this group of buildings from the centre of Benenden, which is identified within the hierarchy. Sorry, I can see somebody's got their hand up. So would you mind making a mental note that Ms. Thomas wants to speak? I'd rather like to finish what I have to say on behalf of the Friends of East End first, please. And so what I was saying about PDL, the scale is excessive based on that, sir. Where the south side of the proposed, the BE3 is concerned, the planning permission granted in 2013, said to be extant for whatever reason, not a spade turned in relation to that, sir. This envisaged redevelopment of the hospital, that's for 24 dwellings only, sir. And so again, sir, it's excessive in sustainability terms to boost up from that. That's something which could happen. It's not something which in justifiable sustainability terms is a reason for doubling the size of development. One's gone from 18 plus 24 to 91 in the total. I think it's 43, 40 something odd plus 40 whatever odd. Yes, it's 40. I'm sorry, I'm not going to do the mental maths. I won't waste time with that, sir. But on PDL, it's excessive. That's my point one, sir. Also, sir, the redevelopment of the hospital, which you've heard about, and redevelopment has happened, has been a self-fulfilling prophecy in terms of justifying development on the alleged basis of previously developed land, because you've had expansion of the hospital, sir, onto greenfield land, and then what's ever left over, the hospital can claim credit twice, in effect, sir, because they can say, well, what we've left behind is now PDL, and so that can justifiably be developed, which again is turning the concept of sustainability on its head, or its sort of mission creep, in relation to wringing an appropriate development, sorry, a level of development out of this site, which is inappropriate on sustainability grounds. And then, sir, if you look, and I made a list of the questions you asked Mr. Bourne about this, there's PDL, which I've just dealt with. He says on sustainability terms, oh, well, of course, it's excluded from the AONB. So if we're not using land which forms part of the AONB, then the logic seemingly goes that it must be more sustainable to use land which is excluded from it. But for all we know, sir, that's just an accident of history, that the hospital site is excluded from the AONB because there was a hospital in it built at the time of King Edward VII, from what I gather, sir. So again, the fact of its being omitted from the AONB is used as a positive reason and justification for boosting the amount of development on it, when I was going to say logic first, and it's fair enough to start with logic, sir, because planning policy is founded in logic, but planning policy itself, in anything involving sequential tests, involving settlement hierarchies, requires one to look at the larger settlements first for concentrating large-scale expansions of housing. And I'm not going to go back to Benenden proper, sir, and the sites yet. That's where I was going to finish up. But I've dealt with PDL, I've dealt with scale of development, the perceived measures to mitigate the impact of this scale of development in a remote settlement, sir, are twofold. There's the idea that somehow the hospital shop can be turned into something which will support these new 91 dwellings. First of all, sir, that's something which is, in my respectful submission, an entirely sort of cosmetic measure. It's something which it's perceived will be done by force of a legal agreement. So either it works that way for the period of 10 years, which Mr. Bourne mentioned, or if it doesn't, what you've then got, sir, is you'll have pressure from somebody like Tesco Metro or whatever it may be to have a shop in East End. And then the process of sustainability actually turns in on itself, sir, because a retail outlet in somewhere like East End would then turn out to be a destination in itself, which is undermining what the fundamental and entirely proper strategy of the plan is, to have development focused on the existing settlement centres. So that's what one measure which is envisaged. So, well, we'll have this little shop. And so that makes the sustainability justification better. The other thing which is said, and Mr. Bourne touched on this, is there's this sort of mini bus service, which will go, I think, to coincide with primary school opening and shutting times. But actually, the council themselves acknowledges that this isn't going to function satisfactorily. Forgive me, I put a sticker in. Yeah, here we are. So I'm looking on page 40 of the Schla. This is talking about the southern site of the hospital, but I think it says the same thing for the northern site. It says under the heading Sustainability Assessment, I'm on page 40 of the Schla. Good use of previously developed land, I've addressed that before, resulting in a positive score for land use objective. However, residents will rely heavily on private cars, and thus air quality and travel objectives score negatively. It says, although promoted by policy, shared transport and active travel options are unlikely to take precedence over private vehicle use, and thus air quality and climate change also score negatively. And then it says biodiversity scores neutral overall. But just focusing in on that's reflecting the fact, sir, that as I put it in relation to the proposed retail provision, this minibus proposal is an entirely cosmetic measure, which it's even acknowledged by the council won't be sufficient to remedy the substantial sustainability defects of this site, when manifestly, and that's where ultimately, sir, I shall be finishing up, that yes, the focus of attention needs to be back on Benenden proper, not on Benenden by fact of being part of the parish, being right at the very boundary of it, almost as far as one can manage from Benenden village proper, sir. So that's what I've got to say on my second my second submission.
When talking about sustainability, obviously there's a difference between sustainability and accessibility, and accessibility obviously forms part of the sustainability picture. And this is a point that representatives have made throughout these examination hearing sessions, other sessions, talking about, well, actually sustainability goes way above and beyond just accessibility, and you know, you've got here the possibility of reusing previously developed land, existing infrastructure, roads, etc., all adds to the carbon footprint. And this was a sort of dynamic that we talked about in the context of the Tudley village, which is, a new village, and the representatives saying, well, yeah, that's a strategy where you've got, nothing there, and you put everything new in, new roads, new infrastructure, new everything. And representatives have been making those points. It's not just about accessibility, it's about the wider consideration of sustainability. But is that not what the council is seeking to do here? It's recognizing that it's recognizing that, yeah, it's an existing development. It's built development, it's built form, it's there. And what the council is seeking to do through its strategy, through its plan, is support, in its judgment, the redevelopment of that site. Recognizing that, yes, the strategy at a much greater scale, yes, obviously focuses on settlements, sustainable settlements, and we've heard a lot about that on the strategy days for this local plan. Why are you building at Tudley Village? Why are you building at Paddock Wood? Why are you not building at Rolton Bridge Wells? We've heard all these arguments about why did you not set out a typical, as I would call it, traditional settlement hierarchy, go all the way through and go, right, we'll have 10,000 there, 400 there, 300 there, and go through it. And we've heard a lot why the council haven't done that. So taking into account what the council says, why is the redevelopment of this site fundamentally unsustainable? Bearing in mind that accessibility forms one part of it, and the council sought to help mitigate the impacts of that. But why would the redevelopment of this site be inherently unsustainable? Is it the principle full stop? Is it the scale, the amount of housing? What is it that's fundamentally unsustainable about this?
It's a combination of factors, sir. And of course, I acknowledge that an assessment of sustainability involves a balance of considerations here, sir. But it's the very remoteness of East End combined with the scale and volume of development which is envisaged for it, which in my submission shows that the process has gone out of control, sir, because it's another important and fundamental part of making a sustainability assessment, that assessment is internally consistent as well, because there has to be a point where one looks at the sites. Again, I keep threatening to come back to them, but such as Uphill within Benenden itself, and there's Iden Green Road, sir. I don't know if you've been taken to that in any of the previous sessions. It's late site number 8, land to the south of Chapel Lane in Iden Green, forgive me. And accepting that is a greenfield site, but it's nevertheless a site which is co-located to the village. It is much, much closer to Benenden proper, as I keep calling it. I hope that's not regarded as disparaging. But that was rejected in the SHLA by the council as being too remote. Whereas, as I say, sir, the process of sustainability assessment has to be kept under control, in my respectful submission. And also it has to be consistent in terms of seeking to strike the right balance. And in my respectful submission, the wrong balance has been struck here insofar as there's the scale of development proposed. And I dealt with the fact that there's only 18 dwellings on the north side of the road, and there's only planning permission for 24 on the other side of the road. To boost that unnecessarily at the expense of concentrating development where there will be a lower carbon footprint, where there will be fewer journeys to and fro by people accessing, egressing the development. That, in my respectful submission, in accordance with the entirely proper strategy of the plan, is what requires the attention to be refocused on the village of Benenden itself rather than East End, sir.
Okay, points duly noted. I think I've got all of that. There was another participant with their hand up, but it's no longer up, so I'm not.
It was Nicola Thomas, sir, and I'm very sorry. I asked if I could keep on going, but it's just rather distracting when one's talking at screen to see somebody's hand there. I'm quite happy to give way if she wants to come back in now, sir. So I'll shut up.
This is the Benenden Parish Council. Yeah, we'll go to Nicola Thomas next, please.
Yeah, there are quite a few issues raised there, so which I'd like to just to address. I'd like just to remind you that the Benenden Hospital is a large hospital. It employs, has about 800 jobs. It employs about 350 people. To keep stating that this site is in a remote location is not entirely correct. There are an enormous amount of car journeys to that site every day. Also, to point towards other sites closer to Benenden Village, the LS8 site that has been mentioned is a greenfield. It's inside the AOMB, the neighbourhood plan, and the local plan have avoided allocating sites of such in such areas. And the reliance on cars, the whole of Benenden has a much higher usage and ownership of cars than anywhere else actually in the borough. I think we are a remote parish, so therefore wherever houses are built, there will be cars. But that is unfortunate. That is a fact. It doesn't matter whether they are at East End or in Benenden Village. You need a car to be living there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I think the framework, I can't remember what paragraph it is. I think it's 105. It's within the transport section. Talks about that, doesn't it? It talks about recognising the difference between urban and rural areas when plan making and decision making around sustainable transport solutions. Obviously, I've heard quite a lot there. So I'll go back to the council, give them the opportunity if they did want to come back. But just a question for the council from me. If I concluded that for soundness, it's not necessary to delete the allocations, do you consider in that case it would still be necessary for soundness, for effectiveness reasons, to ensure that the development requirements are reflected in the same, the neighbourhood plan essentially? And that's in terms of the actual policy requirements. So there's no sort of conflict between the two.
The neighbourhood plan is made as part of the development plan. That's a starting point. We are behind it. We have to respect it. And whatever one might say about process, Parliament has thought it appropriate to give local neighbourhoods, parish councils, etc., the ability to make these plans, and they've done so in this case. There is no need to duplicate the policies. If they were to remain in the plan, we would have to make sure that they were entirely consistent. And that's because someone coming to the plan and looking to develop in the future would have to be confident that the criteria, the policy criteria they were considering was the right criteria. It would not be appropriate and it would not be sound to have a policy in the local plan which differed in any material respect to the made neighbourhood plan. So we would have to check very carefully to make sure that the policies were consistent in terms of their wording and their requirements. And that's particularly so when lawyers like me get hold of these things and start arguing fine points on interpretation. So one has to be extremely careful. So far as the plan is concerned,
sorry to interrupt. Just quickly, just thinking out loud on that point. Could the local plan continue to allocate the sites as it does in its submission form. So it would allocate the sites. And this goes back to a similar point we talked about yesterday in terms of gypsy and traveller provision. It would allocate the sites, A, B, C, and D, bullet point list them, show them on the policy map. These sites are allocated for residential development for X number of dwellings, but then defer the detail to the neighbourhood plan or cross-refer to the neighbourhood plan. So all the local plan was doing was essentially allocating them, but saying the details in the neighbourhood plan. I'm just thinking out loud here, as it might not.
There are several ways in which it can be done. That's an alternative, which means then that by specific reference or express reference, the requirements of the neighbourhood plan are incorporated. Alternatively, one might just have no policy allocation, but recognition within the plan in terms of supporting text to the Benenden chapter about the existence of these allocations in the neighbourhood plan. So that the reader of the local plan would be aware of the existence of the allocations in the neighbourhood plan. They would therefore correspond. So that's another alternative. And actually would be probably quite a neat alternative, because it does as the MPPF requires, it avoids duplication, but at the same time, expressly acknowledges the existence of the allocations in the neighbourhood plan and defers to it. So
Okay.
I hope that helps you. I think when it's appropriate, we would like to respond to a couple of points about the history of this particular site and its brownfield nature, and the redundancy of what's there in the context of the council's strategy to maximise the use of brownfield land in terms of meeting its housing requirement.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Very briefly, to set out that there is the implemented consent, which was for the redevelopment of the hospital buildings and then the provision of the new housing. If there were to not be that only covered part of the proposed allocation, particularly in the southeast elements. There are existing buildings that would remain elsewhere that within that southeast quadrant that could be converted to residential anyway. So the council, in recognition of that, that is one of the factors that was considered as part of its considerations over previously developed land. There is there are areas that are not just including hard standing, they're including existing buildings that could be converted. So again, that's something that weighs into the overall considerations, balancing the fact that it doesn't have the same services as elsewhere versus its PDL nature, the fact that it could those buildings could potentially be converted, plus the existing houses constructed as well. So overall, sir, in terms of conclusion, the council's considerations looked at sustainability in that wider terms, not just accessibility, but PDL, AONB. In fact, there are existing sizable buildings, and I'm not sure if you've seen the site, sir, but Benenden Hospital itself, so that on the southwest quadrant, is a sizable building now, all of which have been factored into the considerations about the suitability of the sites.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other final comments, observations, representations that people would like to put forward for any of these allocations at Benenden? Ms. Lewis.
Thank you very much, sir. Sorry, I'm switching everything on and switching my hand off, because as I said before, I know how distracting that is. Just to sum up, if I may, sir, to start where I began, which is that East End is a fundamentally unsuitable and unsustainable location for substantial development of the sort which this is. Yes, sir, as you've acknowledged, planning decisions need to reflect the balance which there is between, sustainable transport solutions will vary between urban and rural areas, and this should be taken into account in both plan making and decision making. You are absolutely right, sir. That is what paragraph 105 of the NPPF says. But the starting point in the balance always ought to be the higher concentrations of development first. And that goes back to what Ms. Thomas said about, oh, well, there's a great number of car journeys related to the existing hospital use of the site. Well, to the extent that part of the hospital operations will cease in future, sir, that's one whole load of car journeys which won't be on the network anymore, going back to the shops in Benenden or whatever it might be, which people do that. As Ms. Thomas also said, the people who live in Benenden proper all go everywhere by car anyway. So sort of implicitly, well, what are you going to do? And the answer to that question, which I've phrased as a rhetorical question, I'm sorry, I'm going to answer it anyway, is that you limit the number of unnecessary journeys, again, by refocusing development back on the larger centres of population in accordance with what the fundamental strategy of the plan is, sir. And Mr. Bourne came back in and said, oh, well, of course, the council have looked at the number of buildings there are, because if one's doing a PDL assessment, one looks at what footprints one's got and what can be turned into residential. But the fact is, this is the opportunity, sir, by rewriting the planning policy for the neighbourhood, rewriting what will be the most recently in time adopted development plan document within the sense of section 38.5, for you, sir, to revisit the good sense of making a substantial allocation at Benenden Hospital in East End. And in my respectful submission, sir, that is the only reasonable, sustainable outcome. And that can be tested in this way, sir. Despite the fact of planning permission having been granted almost 10 years ago, nothing has happened in relation to the building out of the site. Similarly, there are these 18 perfectly sound dwellings existing on the north side of the road, which can continue to function as such, just as East End has for all these years, sir. There is no need here to put larger forms of development. Insofar as there is a need, again, I respectfully submit, that need should be refocused on settlements, because it's one of the Friends of East End's criticisms of the approach taken by the neighbourhood plan examiner, despite the fact that, well, unlike you, sir, this is what the local plan process involved. He had a one-day examination, sir, in relation to all of this. He concluded that East End was a settlement. Now, that, sir, was a conclusion with no basis in fact, policy, or law, I would respectfully submit. East End is not a settlement. The only settlement which figures as a settlement, which is anywhere near to East End, and it's not very near at all because it's 2.5 miles away, is Benenden. That in accordance with what you call, sir, the traditional hierarchy, and accepting that these matters are a balance, that is the place where the development should be refocused, sir. And you can't do it by having the hospital cafe upgraded to some kind of a shop. You can't do it by having a little minibus which goes to and for primary school times. And as I pointed out, that was actually acknowledged by the council. What, in my respectful submission, and what the residents of East End ask you to do, sir, is go back and look again at sites like land to the south of Chapel Lane, Iden Green. Look at sites again like land off of Green Acres, that's the one next door to the uphill allocation. Look at all of the places where and yes, sorry, sir, there's the other site, which is called, in the Schlar, it's called Site 222. It's the one by New Pond Road. All these sites, which are appropriately co-located with Benenden, which would limit the number of what would otherwise be unnecessary car journeys, because people are going further than they really need to in terms of the proper planning of the area. Urge you, sir, to refocus the centre of development around Benenden, which is, as it were, the proper local centre for that development, and ultimately, I was going to say delete the allocations from the local plan. Make clear, sir, whether it's by recording the fact that site SSP3 has a former planning permission which has the potential for development in future. And similarly, sir, the site to the north, how it contains an area of former hospital housing which has potential for redevelopment in future, but not for them to stand as a joint allocation of 91 dwellings all the way out here in East End, sir. And I'm just checking my notes to see if there's any other point I would wish or need to make on the Friends of East End's part, sir. But no, I do think that's probably it, and I'm grateful for that opportunity. I may pop up again if I get a message saying that there's something which we particularly want to say, which I haven't said on people's behalf, sir. But I am grateful for this opportunity.
Okay, thank you very much. Any final comments then? So appreciate us going back and forth over the same points now, but just in terms of anything final from, we'll go to the parish council and we'll end with the council.
Yeah, I just would like to remind you, sir, that the other sites that has just been mentioned by Mr. Lewis are all greenfields. They're all within the AONB. As a parish council, NDP, we particularly wanted to avoid losing any greenfields and avoid development in the AONB. And the point that also Mr. Lewis made about the one-day hearing that was held for the NDP, I would just like to say that was exclusively, specifically for the East End sites. No other part of the NDP was discussed at that hearing. They had a whole day of discussion about these sites at the public hearing for our NDP. Thank you.
Nothing
So
further.
there's nothing, sorry, nothing from us further, sir. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you all for your time on that one. As I said, I didn't have any other questions. Yes, certainly lots to consider there. So I propose that we'll take a break and then we'll come back after the break and then we can move on and look at the Hawkhurst sites, and I'm pretty sure we'll still get done within good time. So I propose we'll take a break and we'll resume then at 3:40. Is that okay? And if anybody, again, if people don't want to stay for the Hawkhurst session and we're just here for Benenden, then by all means, please feel free to leave the meeting. Alternatively, you're more than welcome to sort of happy to stay and observe. But everyone else just leave cameras and microphone on mute, and we'll resume back at 3:40, please. Thank you. Okay, thank you everyone. It's 3:40, so we'll resume and continue. I want to turn next to the sites at Hawkhurst, which we're going to look at for the remainder of this afternoon session. Like I said, as I've changed things around slightly, but I do want to turn to our attention to Hawkhurst. Policy HA1. Oh, Mr. Lewis got a question.
Sorry, yes, sir, thanks very much. I missed you just before we shut down, and I did thank you very much for hearing me so patiently before the break. I've got 2 points of fact I simply want to raise, which have been brought to my attention, and I'll simply make them and then shut up, sir, and leave you to get on with the rest of the business for the afternoon. But the first one, sir, is that you asked Mr. Bourne, in effect, whose idea it had been first for the strategy of allocations for Benenden Parish, whether it was the parish or the borough council, and he told you that looking at the Regulation 18 version, and then when the neighbourhood plan was examined and then subsequently made, it came from the council, the borough council. In point of fact, sir, and I've looked back at what the neighbourhood plan examiner said, the neighbourhood plan itself, I'm sorry, I've gone and closed the file. The neighbourhood plan was produced in its first draft in February 2019, but obviously the Regulation 18 version of the local plan didn't come into existence until, I think, August, September 2019. So in point of fact, the strategy for Benenden Parish was thought of by the parish council first. And something which follows from that, sir, and this is my second point of fact, Ms. Thomas again told us that the council were very much concerned to avoid any greenfield land. And so that was why attention was directed away from what I would respectfully submit as the sort of obvious sites, which are the ones which are co-located with Benenden itself as a village. But in fact, so if one looks back at Benenden, the Feffy site, which is one of the allocations for Benenden, is in fact on greenfield land, and in my respectful submission is just the sort of place where one ought to be looking for allocations which are properly co-located with the settlements which they're going to, each of which will serve each other, so that people can walk their children to primary school and things like that. They can visit the local shops without jumping in their cars. Anyway, so it was just those 2 points, one on the chronology and 2 on the strategy for not greenfield first, if I may put it that way, which in my respectful submission has led to an over-reliance on PDL. And I'm sorry for coming back in, sir, but those are the 2 points I wanted to make.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Bourne, if I had to move on, or do you want to come back to any of those points?
I'm happy to move on, sir.
Okay, thank you. Policy HA1 then, Highgate Hill, Hawkhurst, the questions there were about the existing plan permission in the council's statement. You've referred to, I think it's a McCarthy and Stone development that's under construction. Is that under construction, or is it just at the approved stage?
It's under construction, sir, and we were advised by McCarthy and Stone that first completions will be October of this year, and they expect the whole scheme to be completed by the 31st of March next year.
Okay, and you set out in your statement the description of development, I think, which is 43 retirement and living apartments. Yeah, okay. Question was question one. Question two, is a site still necessary and justified in allocating the plan? The answer is yes, and we talked about this before. Just because site's got plan permission doesn't mean that the allocation is unsound. You could get alternative schemes coming forward during the plan period. Question three was to do with one of the development requirements. It was point 3. So policy HA1 development requirement 3 says confirmation from the highway authority that there is no objection to the impact of the development at the crossroads of Highgate and on traffic flows along Highgate Hill. It's points of clarity really. I would avoid development requirements requiring things like no objection from the highway authority. It should be the avoidance of harm rather than the avoidance of an objection from a particular statutory consultee. So it's just a minor point for effectiveness of the policy, and I would say just double check others that may have a similar. It's about the avoidance of harm rather than the avoidance of objections per se.
Understood. Thank you.
Any comments, observations on that particular site at this stage? Yeah, Mr. Riles.
Hi, good afternoon, sir. Yes, Mr. Isles for Provision on behalf of Cooper Estates. My video doesn't seem to be working, but can you hear me okay, sir?
Yeah, can certainly hear you.
Thank you. Just one point on to clarify this site, please, which we have highlighted in our representations on matter 7, issue 8, and if I could cross-reference you to paragraph 4.2 of our representation, just to make a very simple but important point for our interest. We have said elsewhere in the examination, I'm sure there'll be other opportunities, that we're concerned about that there's some misunderstanding of what qualifies as an extra care accommodation, and we just wanted to make it clear that this site does not qualify as an extra care scheme. So we just want to make sure that there's absolutely no ambiguity that this can be claimed as part of meeting the extra care need, on the basis that the conditions of the permission quite clearly are only limiting it to over 55 use. There's no element of care requirements, and indeed the section 106 does not have any requirement for care provision. So it's just that simple point for clarity that this site, if allocated, should not be contributing to specifically extra care. It will have a wider role, of course, in older people accommodation, and we don't dispute that, but it's very clear. We just want to be clear that this is not an extra care scheme. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bourne.
No comment, sir.
Okay, policy HA2, Brook House, Cranbrook Road. Is this another one then with planning permission already in place?
It has. Oh, sorry, Paul. Would you mind?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Sorry, sir. So it has outline planning permission, reserved matters, application submitted, not yet determined, but moving towards a determination.
Again, does that very broadly reflect the allocation? And again, back to that question about ensuring there's nothing coming forward which is fundamentally different, which is going to undermine the effectiveness of the plan.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Policy HA3 then. Again, could you just run me through the background? Because this is the site that's adjacent to the golf course. Is that right?
Pass if you like.
Sorry, sir. Yes, it is the site that's adjacent to the golf course. This site and HA2 were formally identified in the plan as a single site in the site allocations plan, but they are in separate land ownerships, and they have been brought forward independently of each other, and that is why we have the two separate allocations. And HA3, if I just look at the proposals map, the northern boundary and the western boundary are consistent with the boundary to the golf course.
And this allocation in itself has permission for 24 dwellings, I think. Is that right?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Yeah, and so that was an outline. Does that remain extant then? Has there been any sort of movement on that? Any reserve matters submission? I know Mr. Wells got his hand up, so no.
I'm not aware of any. I don't know whether Mr. Bourne has got any information on that. I don't think we have any update on that one for you, sir.
Mr. Buckwell?
Yes, thank you, sir. I can provide an update on that. So no, there hasn't been a reserve matters submission on that yet. As has just been discussed very briefly, the site, whilst it has been allocated in its own right, and it has permission in its own right, it also formed part of the wider golf club proposals, which for which an application was submitted a couple of years ago, and an appeal was determined last year. So my client was obviously at that stage considering a more comprehensive proposal, which covered both sites. We've had the decision on the appeal this spring, so understandably my client has been considering their options, but we have until autumn next year to submit the reserve matters application, and that is certainly moving forward towards that at the moment. So I can confirm, yeah, that the site will come forward. You will have seen, sir, the representations we've made on the golf club separately. I know you're not here to discuss emission sites in detail today, but you'll have seen the points that we've raised previously about that and the benefits that could bring, particularly to the crossroads in Hawkhurst.
So as far as the allocated sites concerned then, so separate insofar as local plans concerned, there's nothing land ownerships or constraints to prevent this site from coming forward within the plan period?
No, that's correct. The site is deliverable now.
Okay, any other comments, observations or queries on this allocation from anybody? No. Okay, thank you. HA4 then, which is Cockwell Avenue and Highgate Hill. So again, what's the sort of latest position with any development proposals at this site then?
So this is, I mentioned this in this morning session, it is an appeal decision. And the appeal was on the 22nd of March 2022. The appeal reference is in the paper in our hearing statement, and the inspector allowed the appeal in line with the allocation policy. And I do recommend to you the appeal decision because, as I said, I think this is helpful in understanding the challenges the council faces in terms of the high walled area outstanding natural beauty, the approach it has taken to a sort of rigorous policy approach and a high standard of development, and in particular the inspector commends the applicant's approach for a landscape-led scheme that addresses a number of the A&B management plan objectives directly. So as I do think it is pertinent to the scheme at Cranbrook CRS3, which is, we think, very similar properties.
And again, in terms of, so the appeal, was that for a full scheme, an outline scheme?
That was a fully detailed scheme, sir, and had been worked up in a lot of detail in consultation with ourselves, the A&B unit, and indeed there is on record positive comments from the A&B unit on the approach the applicant had taken. I do believe there is a representative on the call who may say about the delivery, and don't see them at the moment.
So again, as with others, presumably, I think you probably already answered this question, but again, there's nothing within the submitted local plan, mindful that, you know, alternative scheme may come forward, maybe a requirement to change things as time goes on, but there's nothing within the plan that's no fundamental differences or fundamental conflicts between the two.
No, as far as we're concerned, so it's fully compliant.
Yeah. Okay, any comments or observations on this particular allocation then from anybody? No. Okay, I had asked some questions about this, but I think they've largely been covered, and I think as we've gone through quite a lot of these AONB sites, I think a lot of the sort of the higher level conclusions, especially around you know, just justification for these sites in the AONB, etc., have been considered. They've been discussed, and I can largely take the evidence as read. With regard, again, lots of cross references to the LVIA, the way in which the councils determine the area of residential development, the reasons behind that, why it's set out on the plan, etc., etc. So a lot of that, I think we've already discussed at length. So I don't need to add any sort of further questions at this hearing stage, unless anybody wishes to do so, or unless the council had anything further they wanted to add for that one.
Yeah. Sorry, sir. Obviously, we will bear in mind the comments you made previously about references to LVIAs and the findings and so on for this policy, because as you say, who knows whether another scheme might come forward. So we will take a consistent approach to all these policies in terms of minor modifications to them.
Yeah, I'm happy to support any changes to the policy where it just I don't like to use the word tidy up, because that wouldn't represent a sound change, but I think while we're talking about A and B in particular and specific requirements, it's just been making sure that the requirements are clear and effective. And yes, I've set out before at previous sessions, I'd certainly support main modifications to make sure that those policies, especially in regard to the AONB, were clear as to what's required. And again, it goes back to the point that I explored with Mr. Bourne earlier. It's about avoiding harm and mitigation.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'd say we're fully on board with that, and so we're going to take a consistent approach across these allocations. Yeah.
Okay. Just in terms of accessibility on this one, again, the indicative access point to the link. So again, are they reflected in the approved scheme?
Yes, I'm just pulling up the plan now. Oh, just lost it. Sorry.
I think you said in your hearing statement that the approved scheme provides a further pedestrian connection at the northern access to fieldways.
It does. So there was some concern originally with the application whether that could be achieved. That was now established, and that was set out in the inquiry as well. So that has now been achieved, that connection. So it's has far better connections. There's also connections to the local footpath network as well to the south.
So just in terms of the development requirements insofar as access is concerned then, so is there anything that the approved scheme does which is different to the plan?
I will don't think yes. So just colleagues advised me that we would ensure that the policy reflects those things that have been submitted with the plan, I would need to check the exact nature of that before I could be certain. But
have a look, and clearly, if the obviously if the public inquiry has spent considerable time and sort of effort establishing precise access points, and they've been proven to be adequate and acceptable and safe, then it's just making sure that, again, if you're in that situation where a revised scheme doesn't come forward, the applicant is in a situation of, say, conflict with the development plan when actually it's already been previously determined. So
thank you.
An effectiveness point, but I'll leave that with you. Okay, any final comments then on any of the sites that we've heard this afternoon? I'm just checking that we've gone through them all. I believe we have. Highgate Hill. Okay, any final points then? Any representations that people want to make? They've not had a chance yet to do so. No.
So I wonder if I might just go back to something you raised this morning. Nicola Waters has drawn to my attention paragraph 1.4 of the plan, and I'll read it out to you. You don't need to go there. It says this local plan will lead and guide the spatial vision and growth strategy for Tunbridge Wells Borough, replacing the saved policies of the Tunbridge Wells Borough Local Plan 2006, the Tunbridge Wells Borough Core Strategy 2010, and the Site Allocations Local Plan 2016. So it's there.
Yeah, very good. That's fine.
So apart from that, we have nothing else. Thank you very much.
Okay, Charlotte, if you're there, any housekeeping matters or anything arising procedurally that we need to be aware of for tomorrow's session?
No, nothing from me.
Excellent. Okay, so tomorrow we are looking at the Pembury sites. We've got the Pembury sites down as all day. Obviously the reason for that is in case we don't get through them all in the morning, rather than having a reserve session, we've just got the afternoon session as well. We may well get through them in the morning, to be honest. If we don't, it's the same people talking about the same sites, so we can look at lunch breaks and what have you. So I don't envisage we will use up too much of tomorrow afternoon. So I'll thank you all for your time today, and thank you for your contributions, and we'll adjourn for the day, and then we'll resume back tomorrow for 9:30 start.